Welcome, everyone, and good evening. Welcome to tonight's After Hours panelist conversation featuring the NIH Next Generation Research Initiative, Training Future Biomedical Researchers. My name is Dr. Erica Boone, and I'm the director for the NIH Division of Loan Repayment, and I'll serve as your moderator for this evening. In 2017, NIH launched the Next Generation Researchers Initiative to address long-standing challenges that were faced by researchers trying to embark upon and sustain an independent research career, and to take steps to promote the growth, stability, and diversity of the biomedical research workforce. So for today or tonight, we're going to engage in conversation and Q&A with our panelists so that you as session attendees become more aware of important updates in NIH's progress in terms of supporting early stage investigators or ESIs. You understand the purpose and intent of NGRI, as well as NIH targets for numbers of funded next generation researchers. Identify programs for which ESIs are uniquely eligible. Understand ESI extension policies to ensure that ESIs who experience lapses in ability to apply for an R01 may apply for ESI extensions. Also, please note, if you have questions for the panelists, please put those in the Q&A versus the chat feature. So if you'd like for panelists to be able to answer your questions, please put those in the Q&A versus the chat. Also, due to the number of individuals that are participating in tonight's discussion, we may not have the opportunity to get to all of your questions, but we will do our absolute best. But with that being said, if we don't get to your question, feel free to stop by the exhibit hall and speak with staff. We'll be happy to assist you. So now let's welcome our panelists. So our first panelist is Dr. Mike Lauer. He serves as the Deputy Director for Extramural Research. Our additional panelist is Dr. Kay Lund. She is the Director for the Division of Biomedical Research Workforce located in the Office of Extramural Research. And lastly is Dr. Shoshana Kahana, who is also with the Office of Extramural Research. Before we get started, I also want to call your attention to some important resources that we have available. I will put the link to these resources in the chat feature. I forgot to do it just now. However, it is available in VFairs under resources, okay? So if you don't get it, or if I don't get the opportunity to place it within the chat feature while we're having today's discussion, it is absolutely under resources in VFairs. So you won't miss out on this important information. So now let's get started with our Q&A. And Dr. Lauer, I'm going to ask you a question. So can you give the audience an overview of NGRI and why this initiative was developed, please?
So the NGRI, you might say, started with the 2016 21st Century Cures Act, although this has been something that has been of great interest to NIH for quite a long time. The 21st Century Cures Act explicitly called out a Next Generation Researchers Initiative. It called on the NIH to take a variety of steps to increase opportunities for the next generation of researchers to obtain funding, to become independent, and also to diversify the workforce. So the NIH director was given the authority to establish policies to make this all happen. I would point out that at around the same time, the National Academy of Sciences put out a report. They called it Breaking Through, how the next generation of researchers will be successful in getting into the system and then sustaining a pathway for research. And at the same time, a working group of the advisory committee of the director also put together a series of recommendations for a next generation researchers initiative. So all this started a number of years ago and has picked up a great deal of momentum over the last few years. But I would say it was a mix of forces, partly legislative, partly policy, and partly a great desire and worry from the community about the need to enhance opportunities for the next generation of researchers.
Thank you so much for that response. Can you tell me who's considered an ESI and what are some of the benefits that are associated with being an ESI?
So an early stage investigator there's a very precise definition, but briefly, It is someone who has not yet received substantial NIH funding and who is within 10 years of completing their terminal research degree or completing their clinical training. Now, having said that, it's not quite that simple, but that's the general idea. And Dr. Kahana plays a major role in hoping to oversee that we apply the definition of early stage investigator properly. Now, what's the advantage that they get? The agency has declared as a priority that early stage investigators should be funded. So we aim to fund at least 1,100 early stage investigators every year. And to put that in perspective, we get about 4,000 to 4,500 applications from early stage investigators each year. So this roughly means that we want to fund at least 25% of the early stage investigators who come in and request funding.
Okay, thank you. As a follow-up, we do have a question from one of the attendees. As an MD, when does their ESI status start? And I know you kind of talked about this, but can you give us a little bit more information?
So actually, let me defer to Dr. Kahana, because she knows the specifics of this better than I do.
Thank you.
Sure. So I think I tried to type this answer, although I'm not sure that I did it very, very well. So typically for MDs, the end of their fellowship will usually start their ESI period. And if there has not been a fellowship, then typically it's the end of their residency.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be that it was only the end of residency, and now there are clinicians who have to do some required clinical training that is post-residency, and that's now, we're trying to recruit more MDs into the R01 funded workforce.
Thank you for that, Dr. Kahana and Dr. Lund. Can you tell me where a person can check their ESI status? Or how does one check their ESI status?
Sure. So if you go to the education section of your Commons personal profile, it will either be in that section, or if you have already received a prior extension to your status, then you just want to click on the edit pencil icon. You click on that edit icon, and then it will show you your new date.
Okay.
So it's essentially in the education section of your Commons personal profile.
So when would a person lose their ESI status?
Do you want?
Yeah, go ahead, Shoshana.
There's probably two ways. So the first of which is if in the course of that 10-year period or so, they get an R01 or an R01 equivalent grant, or if they are more than 10 years out, right, from either the end of their PhD or postgraduate clinical training.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that one. Dr. Lund, can you tell us more about specialized programs that are specifically targeting ESIs?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few of them. One is the DP2, the other is the DP5. And, you know, the whole thing now is that a number of the different NIH institutes and centers are really trying to prioritize ESIs more. So they're doing better in terms of looking at where the funding is going to stop.
Can you expand upon that a bit more with prioritization of early stage investigators?
Well, maybe Mike can. I mean, I think we have a goal. The NIH has a goal overall, and certain institutes and centers are really trying to fund more ESIs. There are also some particular programs like the MIRA Awards that are for ESIs. So Mike, I don't know whether you have anything to add to that.
Sure. So just to extend on what Kay said, so the DP2 and the DP5 awards come out of the Common Fund program.
Yeah.
And I would very strongly encourage you to look at that. Part of this is that we want to fund what's called high risk, high reward research. So that program is part of the Common Fund program, specifically targeted towards early stage investigators who are interested in doing highly innovative work. And that has been a successful program where we've seen that these scientists do innovative work. They do more innovative work than what would be seen on a standard R01. And they also are successful in staying within training. You know, another one of the programs focuses on being able to go straight from postdoc to being an independent researcher. No, let me try that again. From being a graduate student to being an independent. And this is a way in which researchers can get their independent career started at a younger age than what we typically see. There are also, as Kay mentioned, there are some specific programs outside of the Common Fund that are targeted towards early stage investigators. Perhaps the best known is the so-called MIRA Award. This is I'm very bad at acronyms, so I remember the acronym, but I don't remember what it stands for. But this is an NIGMS program, has been highly successful. They have funded about 100 early stage investigators every year. The idea of this is to fund a program that is being run by a researcher as opposed to a specific project. So instead of saying, I'm going to do aim 1, aim 2, and aim 3, what you say is, I'm a scientist who's done this kind of work. These are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about. What the award would do is that it would enable me to continue and grow this program without being pigeonholed into a specific project. So this was a highly innovative idea several years ago when this got started. And I would have to say it's been an unqualified success. We see that we're getting a diverse group of investigators. They're younger than the typical early stage investigator, and the early returns are that they are doing really outstanding work. There's going to be another kind of special program which we've announced already in general terms, and there will be more details coming out soon. And that's an award which is named in memory of Dr. Stephen Katz. Dr. Katz was the late director of the National Institute of Arthritis, Musculoskeletal, and Skin Diseases, NIGMS. We miss him dearly. He he was a mentor to many of us, myself included, and he cared very deeply about the next generation of researchers. And maybe Shoshana, this was a big part of your life over the past 6 months, was helping to design this program. You can tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. So I think Mike hit on the high points. I'm a little hesitant to go into too much detail, before the FOA is released, other than just to say that this is a trans NIH effort. There's a lot of support for it. I'm sure you've heard this a lot, but it's really true. It should be coming out any day. And had there been no regionals, it probably would be out. So just keep your eyes open over the next few days.
Well, thank you very much for those great explanations. We have some questions about the extension process. Dr. Kahana, can you hit on the extensions for us, or can you talk a little bit more about extensions for us, please? And also sure. Within that, the next set of questions will be COVID-19 related extensions.
Yeah. So, in general, we're a, committee that recognizes that, life is not sort of linear for a lot of us. And there are things that happen in life that sort of make it hard sometimes to keep our focus on research. And that can, include childbirth, childcare, illness, disability, military service, things of that sort. And so we have a pretty detailed process whereby we actively encourage PIs to submit extensions to their ESI status. We have an automatic extension policy for childbirth. That's about a little over 2 years. That was published in 2018. I think in one of the resources that Erica has, we have a pretty, we have a YouTube video on really just how to, sort of mechanically fill it out. We have, sort of really tried to make it as streamlined and as easy as possible. So you can actually sort of make the request from your Commons profile, and then it comes directly to us. We as a committee sort of review these bi-monthly, and I'm trying to think what else would be helpful. Tend to turn these around pretty quickly, and then essentially whatever time is granted, we add to the end of your prior ESI end date. I don't know if I'm jumping the gun here, but we have been also very generous with COVID-related requests. And so as we know, people have, obviously not been able to, get to the lab, do their research. So we have been actively encouraging folks to put in requests. At the beginning of the pandemic, we were asking folks to wait until they really, sort of knew, sort of the full grasp of how their research would be impacted. I would say beginning in July, August, we started seeing, a bolus of COVID requests come in, sort of around the 5 to 6 month mark, sort of since March.
Well, I think one thing to point out is that we have this ESI Extension Committee, yes, which reviews all of the ESI extension requests. And one of the things that has been, I think, really positive is just about everybody agrees to the amount that can be granted. So I hope it's okay to say this. For women, we're giving an automatic 1 year. For men, they can put in a request for the amount of time that they lost. And, again, that's been pretty consistent all the way through the ESI Extension Committee.
So I do have a question that is asking about the difference between how you might submit an extension request that's COVID-19 related versus another life situation.
The beautiful thing is there isn't one. Really, so the process is the same. The only thing that would be different is the reason, right? So there is actually a drop down. And for COVID, we actually developed a new drop down that was public health emergency. And, they would just sort of add a little bit, sort of detail about some of the dates. And, we have that all written out, but in terms of process, there isn't any. It's the same.
There is a follow-up question asking about, can you please review the table we should use for outlining effort time away from research when making an ESI extension request, like it listed in the ESI FAQ section?
That is a very granular question. And if you get that PI's name, and I have a feeling, I think I know who it is, okay. I'm going on record as saying I am happy to follow up on email or just a call. That's a very, yeah.
All righty. Well, there's another one that says, can you only submit a request for ESI status extension once?
No. So there are some, folks that have submitted, at separate times, of course, for either, childbirth, then, COVID happened. So there's no cap on the number.
Okay, great. There was another question moving away from the extension questions. So this one might seem a little granular, but bear with us. Is there any strategy for new researchers who do not meet ESI criteria and who do not have substantial publication records? I work with faculty who have been involved in clinical and education endeavors, but are interested in research, but are having a hard time obtaining grant funding due to competition with professional research faculty, quote unquote, who are able to focus on research full time.
Yeah, so I'll take that one. I get that. These are, we call them new researchers, although this is it's a very confusing term because an early stage investigator is also a new researcher. But what we mean by that is somebody who is coming into the NIH system for the first time, but they're not an early stage investigator, so they don't meet the specific criteria for an early stage investigator. There are a variety of such situations. One might be exactly what you're describing. Another might be somebody who has been a researcher, but not in the NIH spheres. Maybe they do computer science, and they have typically been funded by industry or by the National Science Foundation or the Department of Energy. And we have now put out a program in which we're saying, actually, we would like people with that kind of expertise to come into the NIH fold and address biomedical questions. So in some cases, we put out specific announcements that we're looking for a certain type of person or a research team with a certain kind of background that isn't typically NIH. And those announcements we would post in our guide, and the institutes and centers would market those and advertise those. We do know that you are right, that researchers who are not early stage investigators and are coming in later in the game and they're new to the system and are not coming into a specific announcement have a harder time getting funded. That is absolutely true. And the data do support that. We actually presented some data at the advisory committee to the director meeting last December. And that's data that is publicly available, and we can certainly share that. That is true. I guess my advice would be two things. One would be to look for opportunities that are specifically targeted towards people who are new to the NIH, who have not been in the NIH system before. Those announcements are out there. And then I guess another piece of advice I would give is team up. Collaborate. Many of our awards, in fact, I think 30% of our R01s are multi-PI awards. In other words, there's more than one PI. I'll give you a quick story from my own life, which is that
I was about to ask for a story.
Yeah, right. So somehow I met a mathematician. He was from Rutgers University. I have no idea how we met. I honestly cannot remember. But somehow we met. And so I'm a cardiologist with an interest in biostatistics and epidemiology, and he is a mathematician who's interested in operations research. We come from completely different worlds, but somehow we got linked together. Now, he would be what we would consider a new investigator. He had been doing work for a long time, but nothing to do with biomedicine. So one thing I would have to say is we learned a lot from each other. One thing that we learned was that many of the concepts that we were addressing were quite similar, but we had completely different names. So we called something a hazard ratio, and he called it something else. And it took us about an hour until we realized that we were in violent agreement and talking about exactly the same thing. But this was a matter of language. We had to. So we wrote a grant together. And he got funded. And actually, we did some pretty neat work that came out of that. So, this was a case where, I think he was looking for an opportunity to break into biomedical research. He had never done biomedical research in his life. And it was by virtue of the fact that somehow we were brought together that this could happen. So I think that's another piece of advice I would give you is look for opportunities where you've got something special to offer, maybe a particular area of expertise or some background or a different way of looking at the world, and you link up with investigators who have already broken into the NIH system, and you can potentially put together a really good package that would be attractive to the agency.
So are you finding that this collaboration, this kind of collaboration is becoming more and more popular or more commonplace? Or do early stage investigators not typically think in that space?
Yeah, well, one thing that we do know for sure is that we started the idea of multiple PIs, more than one PI on a grant in 2008 or 2009. And it was kind of a novel idea. Before then, we had so-called co-investigators, which we still do, but that doesn't quite have the same prestige as being an actual principal investigator. So we started that back in 2009 because we recognized that this is how the direction that science is moving in. And we went from 1% of all grants to, I think now it's 30%. It seems to grow every year. So yeah, I think this is something which is becoming really more the norm, and this is good. This is a good trend.
We're going to bounce around a little bit. So with that being said, you gave out some statistics. I have a question about the percentage of ESIs that get funded roughly.
It's about 20. So the number, it's about, I think 27%, 25%, 27%, something like that. And to put that into perspective, that is higher than for all investigators, and that's because the agency has specifically prioritized. So we get, I think last year we got 4,700 applications, maybe it was 4,500 applications from early stage investigators. The vast majority of early stage investigators submit one application each. So that's about the same number of early stage investigators. We funded in 2019, I think we funded about 1,300, and the numbers for 2020 are not finalized yet, but it's going to be about the same or maybe even a bit higher.
Okay. Our next question is, can you consider a professor at an HBCU or minority serving institution who does not yet have an NIH award as an early investigator?
Shoshana, you want to take that one, or Kay?
I think they'd be a new investigator.
New investigator.
Yeah.
And some ICs prioritize new investigators, some don't. So it really depends.
And what is the best way to find out about IC prioritization?
Yeah, go ahead, Shoshana.
So sometimes they'll, just have it on their websites. It's, to be honest, sometimes it really just helps to call up a program officer that, that certain ICs and be like, so what's the practice there in reality? Again, you can't do that with, all the ICs, but if there's about, 2 or 3 that, that you could see housing your research, it might not be a bad idea just to contact or, sort of just to look on web pages.
Yes, I agree.
We have almost all the institutes have put out strategic plans, and we actually have I think we have a dedicated webpage in OER where we can go to all the individual strategic plans, and those are worth looking at because that will give you a sense as to what the institutes consider to be important. We also have an interesting feature in Reporter, which is called Matchmaker. And this is not from Fiddler on the Roof, but what this is a way in which you can put in some information about the kind of science that you do. So you might want to copy and paste an abstract from a paper that you wrote, or you can just even write a few sentences. But and then what it will do is it will identify for you grants that are similar to what you might be interested in. You can also use that to identify program officials who have an expertise or who are overseeing a portfolio that seems to be kind of similar to what you're interested in. And in fact, it's very cool. So you can actually, you can look at this and see what kind of portfolio that program official is overseeing. And then you can look at those grants and say, yeah, that's me. That's the kind of thing that I'm potentially interested in. And then there are some security features you have to go through, but you can then use this to send an email to that program official and say, hi, I have an idea of doing X, Y, and Z. Is this something that might be of interest? And what is this the right funding opportunity to apply to?
I'm glad that you brought up the NIH Matchmaker tool. I teasingly refer to it as the researcher's version of Tinder or Plenty of Fish with regards to research. And I talk to my early stage investigators who are applying for the LRPs about this all the time, because one of the things that they don't necessarily think about is diversification. of their own research funding and looking at and across the different ICs to see who's funding what and who are the people within the extramural communities that are interested in a similar kind of work as which they are, because that would help to facilitate networking relationships as well. So we're going to, I have one comment basically related to what you were talking about, Mike, with your vast networks and collaborations that may not necessarily on the surface seem like they fit well together. There's one attendee that says, I manage a team of obstetricians, electrical engineers, psychologists, and computer science folks all working on a fetal heart rate project using machine learning. Talk about different languages.
Oh, cool. I love that.
That sounds, so as a former cardiologist.
I love that.
I knew you love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's, we're back to the ESI, right? So I submitted my first R01 while on my last year of my ESI. My proposal was not discussed. Do I have a chance to resubmit as an ESI?
So I'm assuming in that question, I could be wrong, but I'm assuming in that question that their ESI status lapsed between the initial submission and the resubmission. And if that is true, then they have a 13-month window from the date of their A0 submission to their A1, where even if their A1 could still be flagged as ESI if it's submitted within that 13-month window.
Yeah.
All right, Maria, Alicia, that answer was for you. So now we're going to move on to our next question. I think I understand the impact of being an ESI in terms of study section review and funding decisions, but I'm not sure how whether being a new investigator helps an application. Can you clarify the impact of being a new investigator on an application? If you're both an ESI and an NI, does that change anything? That's from Scott Halden, and he says, thank you very much.
If you're both, if they're already in ESI, then they
you were talking about new.
Yeah, if they're already in ESI, they get reviewed early on at the beginning. Most study sections, anyway. The ESIs get reviewed all at once. If they're a new investigator, I'm not as sure about that. Do the new investigators still get put into that, and they're not an ESI? I know that when I've been on some study sections, I think both the ESIs and the new investigators were actually reviewed early.
That's right.
Yeah, so I think that they're clustered still together.
Correct.
Is my understanding. I think in reference, it depends on the institute, right? And so it's possible that being a new eye, that some, institutes might prioritize such a PI for funding, just, sort of just a bit of a bump, whereas it might not matter all that much in, other institutes. So in part, it's sort of dependent on the institute.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now I have a couple of questions with regards to types of funding mechanisms that a person would be eligible to apply for. Can I still apply for a diversity supplement if you've previously had a K award? Presuming that you meet the eligibility criteria.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if they've had a K award and they're from a group that sort of qualifies for a diversity supplement and they want to work with a PI to get more preliminary data, then they can certainly do that. Not all ICs fund at the faculty level, though. So I think a lot of them, quite a lot of them do, but not all of them do.
I see a common theme here with reaching out to the programmatic officials to gain more information here. Always tell individuals that are applying for LRPs, your program officer is your research best friend.
Yeah.
So if my investigator wishes to be a research specialist but does not want to manage their own lab, are there grants besides an R50 for these individuals?
Well, okay, so there's the R50. The R50 is specifically designed for the equivalent of a staff scientist, but it's certainly not at all unusual that that a staff scientist would be supported on a standard research grant. One of the things that we do is for our progress reports, we collect information about all the personnel who are working on a grant or who are at least putting in one calendar month a year on the grant and what their role is. So they might be the PI, they might be a co-investigator, and one role is that they're a staff scientist, and that's certainly a common we certainly see that. So that's probably the most common route. The problem with that is, of course, you are dependent upon your principal investigator, the grant that is designated for the principal investigator. I mean, there's both a positive and a negative to that. The idea of the R50 program is that it's a grant that is specifically linked to you, even though you are functioning as a staff scientist. And so what that means is that you could more easily move from one location to another, and take the funding along with you. So then the National Cancer Institute, I think, has the largest R50 program. That's been in place now for at least 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And so we're probably now at a point where we can see how well that has actually worked.
Is there priority given to the first renewal of an ESI's first R01?
In some cases, yes. So Shauna, go ahead.
No, I was going to be a bit silly. Sort of like a little bit of a trick question, right? Because if they've had an R1, they're not ESIs anymore. So it's, but I think it's fair to say that some ICs are monitor sort of renewal rates and are mindful of that.
So I know that at the institute that I used to work at NHLBI, the Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. At the time, what we had, and I don't know if this is still true now, but I wouldn't be surprised, and you'd have to check. But at the time, what we had was that if you were an established investigator, but you were on your first R01, and you got that R01 as an ESI. So now you're an ESI, you're now funded on a grant, and now it's several years later, and you're looking to get a competitive renewal, that you would get an edge. And it wasn't as much of an edge as the first time around, but this is important because we know that we lose a substantial number of researchers at the time of that renewal. And in some cases, we lose them because for good reasons, like they decide they don't want to do this anymore, and that's okay. But what's very unfortunate is if we lose a researcher who's doing really good work and submits a good proposal, and because of the competitive environment that we're in, they're unable to secure funding. So this is something that some of our institutes pay particular attention to. Because we want to, somebody's doing good work, we want to keep them going.
If I am an ESI and collaborate with an established investigator to submit a multi-PI application, does my ESI status still apply? No. Well, that one was quick, wasn't it? Okay.
So that's why they should definitely try to put something in as ESI.
Yes. So and this is a good question, if the ESI status starts after fellowships for MDs, why does the ESI status not start after postdoctoral training for PhDs?
It's just because it's required clinical training. So that, it's the ESI status is 10 years out, either from the residency or if they have a required period of clinical training after the residency, they add that on as well.
I think that's probably implied in their question, that they're feeling as if the postdoc is really kind of a requirement in order for them to move into an investigative, a research career. So my next question is, for new investigators who missed the ESI benchmark due to prolonged postdoctoral training due to lack of permanent positions, are there any special considerations at NIH? Maybe there are some sort of visa-related issues or, something not necessarily related to the research.
I think beyond what we've already talked about, probably not.
Mm-hmm. All righty. Thank you very much for that one. We're going to start to wrap up because we're now at 5:41. And I'm sorry that we're not going to have the opportunity to answer all of the fantastic questions that were submitted. But again, please be reminded that all of the panelists will have a time at one of the NIH booths, right? Well, Mike, will you have any time? I don't think that you will, right?
Not that I know of.
But Dr. Kahana and Dr. Lund will. So feel free to reach out to them during the next 2 days in the chat, or you can establish a time that you might want to talk to them. And there's actually a very handy feature in vFairs where you can actually have a video chat with people. Sometimes the questions are a little bit more involved than what you wish to be engaged in a chat box, and you'd like to reach out and talk. But as we wrap up, I would like to ask each of the panelists for their best pieces of wisdom or advice for early stage investigators, whether it's talking about transition points within their careers or just starting out. What do you wish that someone told you when you were starting your research career that you tell people now?
Well, I'll say, actually, I'll just make a friendly amendment on that question. I feel so lucky. I had a wonderful mentor. Actually, I had wonderful mentors. And I think that that's a key point here is that while having a mentor is important, I had a number of mentors. And then the other thing was I had colleagues and we talked to each other a lot. We helped each other a lot. So I think an important part of this is getting advice and getting advice from many different sources, and never, ever, ever be afraid to ask for help. When I first started applying for grants, I showed my drafts of my grants to many people who told me how terrible the work was, and I am so grateful to them because of that. I was able to make it. I guess it was okay.
Yeah, I mean, I did the same thing where I basically had people take a look at the initial part of the grants first and really give me some feedback about what was needed, who should actually be included in the grant. So having people review ahead of time is really important.
I think that it can be really scary for early stagers to get feedback from their work because they wrap so much of who they are into what they do. And instead of the feedback serving as an opportunity for growth and learning, they take it as I'm a terrible investigator, or I don't know what I'm doing, or the people around me don't think that I know what I'm doing. So I'm really thankful that you both just said that you looked at that as an opportunity for you to be able to improve, because that's exactly what it is. And your mentors that are around you and surrounding you would not be investing that kind of capital in you if they didn't feel if you were up to snuff. So really kind of removing those imposter thoughts, or at least still writing, even though you're having them, and investing in the people who are investing in you so that you can improve your opportunities and your chances and opportunities for learning is really important. Dr. Kahana?
No, I think for me, it would just probably just to let folks know that it's okay to pivot. There's nothing heretical about taking a pause and just being like, is this really for me? Is this the kind of science that I want to do? Just to pause and to pivot is okay if that's what you feel like, you're at.
I literally just talked to an LRP awardee earlier, and we talked about power in pivoting. And oftentimes when we consider ourselves transitioning or pivoting, we think because we're doing that, we're making a change because something didn't work out.
Or something's bad. Yeah.
Something bad happened. But even when that bad thing does happen and you make a pivot and you make lemonade out of that lemon, that's a thing to be celebrated. Dr. Lauer, I think you were going to say something, or were you not?
No,
you took yourself off of mute, so I thought you were going to jump into the conversation.
Yeah.
Well, with that being said, reach out to your networks. It's okay to ask questions, and there's power in pivoting. We're going to bring this session to a close. So thank you all for joining us today. If you have additional questions, please visit the booths. There are staff members from all of the NIHICs that are willing and waiting to take your questions. So with that being said, we thank you all for attending and have a fantastic evening.
Yeah. Thanks, Erica.
Thank you to our panelists.
Yeah, thank you.